Welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me from his home is Shaka Sal himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Ndugu Paul.
How are you?
I have to say that I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested, an awesome son of Mother Africa.
Shaka Extra Time is a show that comes to you every week, and we try to analyze some of the issues, the major stories on the continent. I think let's start with the coronavirus pandemic.
But before I go there, please allow me or permit me to compliment you for looking incredible. You look like you are really ready to hit it off with the new year.
I'll take your compliment, Shaka. When the new year started, I said that one of the things that I was going to do is to be positive. 2020 was a year that a lot of people really went through so much, and for that I said, how can I make a difference in 2021? So I said maybe the best way to really to go forward is to stay positive and look towards a brighter 2021. There were a lot of positive things that happened in 2020, but to a lot of people, again, there were a lot of negative things that happened. So many people died, so many people lost jobs. So as a result of that, I think that we just have to look forward to a better 2021.
Ndugu Paul, that's why I think that it makes sense when I say sometimes that I happen to be hopelessly romantic, meaning that I'm an incredibly optimistic person, the type of person that sees all the time the glass as half full rather than half empty.
I could not agree more with your sentiment. The coronavirus pandemic, we see a new variant that has also caused a lot of havoc in South Africa. It has now spread. We've dealt with this for nearly a year now. When you think about it, when it started in Wuhan in December of 2019, to this day we are still talking about it. What's at risk, Shaka?
It is not surprising that when you have a virus, you should also subsequently expect a new variant, a new strain, because viruses basically, scientists say, get to mutate. They mutate, meaning they adjust when they begin interacting with human beings, with the body and what have you. They begin to adjust themselves so that they can actually be even more effective, more deadly. The good news is that scientists are obviously very much aware of that. And when the people and when the scientists and researchers of Pfizer company and the biotech company of Germany were doing their Pfizer thing, their vaccine, they were able to put those factors into consideration. And as such, so far they have actually been able to do some homework, which has concluded that the manner in which they put together their virus, it is actually in a position of being able to reprogram itself to such an extent that it remains effective even with the new variant strain of the United Kingdom, of South Africa. There is, in fact, there are reports that there is also a new strain from the United States. And there are also other reports suggesting that there could also be a virus that coming from the Oga country, Nigeria.
You raise a very good point there that all viruses mutate. But for some reason, some experts are saying that this could actually be even more lethal.
In terms of transmission, it is much more transmittable than the original one. But again, as I said, Paul, the good news is that at least the vaccine that we have so far, Pfizer has actually done its homework and concluded that you don't have to worry very much because it remains effective even for that particular strain.
That's a great point. Let's talk about the vaccines, Shaka. Vaccines are currently being distributed and people are being vaccinated across America, Europe, but we haven't seen anything like that in Africa. Africa will probably get some of their vaccines maybe mid-year. How can the rest of the world try to do their part when Africa is left out? And what if there is anything that we've learned from this coronavirus pandemic is that this virus really has no borders. It transcends across every border. It doesn't need a visa to go to any place. So people here are safe when Africans are not vaccinated against the coronavirus.
Well, you're right, Ndugu Paul. In fact, the more reason why it is the fierce urgency of now to make sure that every human being on this planet Earth has unfettered access to the vaccine. Because as you put it rightly, it is a sort of virus, by the way, that does not necessarily respect borders or boundaries. It is also so stubborn that can actually move from one country to another without necessarily requiring a visa.
The global leaders, the world should come together to help countries that cannot help themselves. For example, we've seen these Western countries, they all rush to buy some of these vaccines. But when it comes to Africa, we are still waiting for people to donate. We are still waiting for aid. Very few countries have the resources really to buy some of these vaccines.
You know, the good thing is that there is such a thing, at least for the first time, as the Africa Centers for Disease Control, which is headquartered in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, which of course happens also to be the de facto diplomatic and political capital of Africa. And so the good news so far is there are some countries, in fact, that have been able to access some of the vaccines that are already on the radar. But there is also a plan for, from the CDC, Africa CDC in Addis Ababa, through the United Nations, to make sure that other countries from the African continent will also have access to some of those vaccines. Because as I said at the outset, it is in the interests of all of us. This is a disease, as you pointed out rightly, that has neither borders nor boundaries. And so at the end of the day, we have to be, in fact, in a position where we have to begin behaving and acting as our brothers, sisters keeper. So we have, in fact, to be there for each other. We have to hold each other's backs. That is the only way we are going to succeed against this virus.
You know, a couple of days ago, I was talking to a friend of mine. He said that it's kind of ironic that countries that have had elections during this period, or countries that are about to have elections, a country like Uganda, for some reason, they were able to allocate money to run these elections, to go forward with these elections. But surprisingly, they were not able to allocate money to procure some of these vaccines. How ironic is that?
The vaccines have come up recently. And so it is possible that there might have been other things that were more urgent at the time, given the kind of paucity of resources. And so I think we have to give some of those governments the benefits of the doubt. Where there is a problem is that, in fact, there were some monies given some officials in order to help the people mitigate the virus. And some of that money, unfortunately, was put to individual and selfish use. That is criminal. If you misuse the money that has been given to you for helping a community mitigate a deadly disease such as the COVID-19, to be honest with you, it's not only criminal, it's unconscionable. It's unconscionable to such an extent that those types of people, if in fact were able to be identified, they should be prosecuted. Because these are people that are only patriotic to their stomachs, the stomachs of their families and friends. They are not patriotic to their nations. We can't afford that.
You bring up a very good point. When you go on social media, you learn so much about how some of that money was spent to the extent that you now have what they call COVID millionaires, people who benefited from these COVID funds. In some places, countries were fundraising within and outside, but most of those monies was stolen by the people who were supposed to make sure that they take care of their own citizens.
Yes, I was in fact reading some stories regarding what you characterize as COVID millionaires. One of the countries that was named was the Republic of Kenya. There was also another country, the land of the ogres, Nigeria. But in fact, those are the only two countries so far that I have read about. It's quite possible that there are even many more who belong to that club. It's most unfortunate, honestly, because at the end of the day, we need each other. If there is anything that we could actually learn from this virus, it is that we need to step up to the plate and begin to sincerely regard one another as brothers and sisters, regardless of which neighborhood we come from, regardless of social, economic, political kind of status. We have seen that this is such a disease that doesn't really give a damn. It has hit presidents. It has hit royalty. It has hit big men, big women, just as much as it has actually hit the ordinary guys. I think that we are basically looking at a disease, to be honest with you, that some cynic would in fact characterize as an equal opportunity employer.
That's, I guess, a perfect segue to our next segment. Let's talk about the upcoming elections in Uganda. Ugandans head to the polls on Thursday, January 14th. What's at stake? You have President Yoweri Museveni, who has been in power for 35 years for the first time. One of his challengers is about the same age he has been in power. What's at stake in Uganda?
Very interesting. Well, you seem to have actually essentially spelled it out. It seems to me that what you actually said, that sort of comparison and contrast of a president that has actually been in power for almost a generation and is running against someone that in fact is as old as almost the time that he has been in power, it probably means that the president really, to be honest with you, his future is behind him. And his opponent, at least the key opponent, who I gather is about 38, you can clearly see that his future and the generation he represents is ahead of him and ahead of them. So, to be very honest with you, given that his generation, and we are talking about Bobby Wine, Mr. Chagulanyi, the artist, he represents a generation which also, by the way, is a type of a generation at this point in time that forms the majority, not only on the African continent, but in Uganda in particular. We should even look beyond this act, which is called an election on January 14, on Thursday. We should look beyond that, because whether you like it or not, nature has got its limitations. Because all of us, as far as nature is concerned, we have what someone would characterize as expiration date. And so, whether we like it or not, it is the world of the Chagulanyis, right from where we are right now.
Shaka, you make a great point. Most Ugandans are under the age of 35, and maybe to put it bluntly, that's more than 3/4 of the population. But there are those who argue that under President Yoweri Museveni's leadership, the country has had a long period of peace and stability, big development projects. President Museveni is seen opening factories, creating employment for a lot of young people. Despite the fact that he has been around for a long time, he has done a remarkable job in trying to maybe take that country to the next level.
Yes, I think that there's no question that he has done some good things. But that is exactly why you should be president. That is exactly why you should be head of a government. For a government to justify its continuing in power, its existence in the Gupor, it has to be able to provide services. It has to be able to provide security to its people, to its people's property. It has to be able at least to put in place some fundamental infrastructure. And so that is not something that we should really praise you for, because that's part of your job description. I think that what is really called peace and stability is probably a misnomer. Because when you think about it, peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace, in fact, should be the ability to be in a position to solve the conflicts if and when they occur. Peace and stability is not the absence of war, Ndugupo. It's not the absence of violence. In fact, violence is pretty much in place as we talk. Peace and stability, scholars argue, is in fact the presence of social, economic, political, cultural justice for all. And it will be very difficult for you to prove, or at least convince me sincerely, that those are the sort of conditions that obtain in the boundaries of the Republic of Uganda as we talk.
This election has been characterized by a lot of violence. When you look at what has been going on, the opposition campaigning across the country has almost been impossible. But there are those who say that the reason we've seen a high level of violence directed towards the opposition, it's because they could not comply with the COVID guidelines, and they are putting their lives at risk, putting the lives of a lot of Ugandans at risk. Your thoughts?
I know that you and I have argued over the years about elections in Africa, you have actually come up with what is very much in vogue on the African continent, that elections are held periodically, that they may not be free, fair, transparent, verifiable, and credible, but that at least, unlike 30, 40 years ago, where you had generals, colonels, corporals, sergeants using AK-47 to seize power and stay in state houses without conducting any semblance of an election. At least for now, we have what is called periodic elections. But is that the answer, really? Is that the answer?
Probably not.
I think that we need to go beyond that. Africa is mature enough to choose its leaders. And Africa is not going to develop until and unless its people are in a position to choose who should lead them. And what we are seeing in most of Africa, and Uganda in particular, is having an election that in fact is simply an event that someone would call taking people through the motions, rather than in fact holding an election. Because when you talk about an election, Dugupol, you have to look at the political playing field and ask yourself whether in fact the political playing field is leveled. When you come to the Ugandan Republic, since 1996, you have had periodic elections take place every 5 years. But all those periodic elections, there is evidence that suggests you have the incumbent government being the sole organizer, sole manager of those events. You are talking about, for example, having two people competing in the heavyweight political championship. And you have an individual who represents the incumbent government with his hands free and legs free. But the opponent of that particular individual has their hands tied behind their backs, their feet tied together, and when the representative of the incumbent government boxes, expects the other individual to counterpunch. How in the world can you possibly counterpunch when your hands are tied behind your back?
Let's go back to the point that you made earlier, where you made reference to the ruling party being in charge of who decides who is going to be the person counting the vote. Are you perhaps suggesting that we are looking at a scenario where we are referring to a Joseph Stalin here, who once said that it really doesn't matter how many people show up to vote? What matters is who counts the vote. Because if going by that scenario, or by that example, obviously the opposition has no way it can even measure up in these elections. The electoral body can decide to determine who wins the election by simply, since these are going to be scientific elections anyway, the electoral body can decide to make scientific results.
I don't know about science, because science is based on facts and based on evidence, and the kind of evidence that can be in fact replicated. The facts that science is made of are not facts that only belong to one political party. They are facts that are universal. Yes, you're right. In fact, Joseph Stalin used to talk about how it was really not important for people to go and vote. They could go and vote as much as they wanted. But what was in fact even more important was the individuals who counted the vote. It is no accident, frankly, that that great empire, that great political empire that was once a superpower, the Soviet Union, no longer exists. It collapsed.
What does the opposition need to do to win this election? Because a lot of Ugandans have been saying that 35 years of one person in power is too much. And maybe it's about time the opposition had an opportunity to run the affairs of the country.
I think what the opposition should actually have done is to come under a united front, to have one candidate, essentially uniting a coalition or an alliance of opposition political parties to compete against the incumbent president, General Yoweri Museveni Tibuhaburwa. I have seen that in history, when you have a long-serving incumbent, no matter how weak that particular incumbent is, no matter how weak that government is, it is still, for practical purposes, very difficult to uproot until you are able to unite under one umbrella. It happened, for example, in 2002 in neighboring Kenya. The then Kenyan president, Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, who had ruled Kenya for 24 years. He had come under tremendous pressure from essentially the international community. What he decided to do was to come up what was later known as the project. And for this project, he picked a young man, Uhuru Kenyatta. But in 2002, despite all those advantages, Uhuru Kenyatta lost the election. He lost the election to a gentleman by the name Emilio Mwai Kibaki. And the reason Mwai Kibaki won that election with his colleagues is because they united under one political party, which brought together all the opposition political luminaries, including former Kenyan Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga.
Very good.
And unless and until you look for a different path, but that even in this different path, you really have to be united. It is going to be a Herculean task. It is going to be very, very difficult to remove an incumbent, however weak his government may be.
Well, Shaka, let's end it there. Thank you so much for your time.
You're most welcome, Ndugu.